deep dark night fell over the walls of the ancient royal palace. The rising moon illuminated its walls, grayed by time. The sky, strewn with bright stars, covered it with a soft blanket. It was her first night as the crown princess of the kingdom. The difficult day today was finally over. She became the wife of the crown prince today. Thoughts kept the girl from falling asleep for a long time, but eventually she managed to do it. Unfortunately, her sleep was short-lived. She opened her eyes wide and was surprised by the loud scream that woke her. The girl's heart fluttered in her chest. She was agitated by the thought that something could have happened at such a late hour. Sitting up in her bed, she saw her maid, who was covering her mouth with her hand. Her maid's eyes were frozen in silent horror. Half asleep, the girl still could not understand what had happened, and hearing nothing in response, she asked the maid what had happened. No one answered her. Already beginning to wake up from her sleep, the girl realized that the maid had woken her with her screams. The princess asked her the following question. The maid, speechless with horror, could not utter a word. The words stuck in her throat like a lump. Only with a glance could she show her mistress her hand, which lay on the hem of her dress. Looking in the direction, the princess's gaze froze in surprise and horror. What could have happened to her on that fateful night? She remembered everything that had happened to her up to that moment. She remembered the moment when she fell into it. The next thought that came to the princess was the thought of whose blood was on the blade of the weapon. Who could have become her victim? The girl understood perfectly well that she could not have become a murderer. She quickly tried to analyze all the circumstances of this situation. Suddenly, following her maid's gaze again, the girl turned her head and saw the bloody body of the crown prince lying behind her. He was lying behind her, his arms and legs spread wide. The princess was haunted by the thought of what had happened here. Who could have been the killer of her newly made husband, and who had put the murder weapon in her hands? Suddenly, at the last moment, the horror of what had happened did not leave the girl. She could not understand how all this had happened. It seemed impossible to her that she could kill the crown prince. The thought of this did not give the girl peace. Since she became the young prince's chosen one and settled in the palace, she had received nothing good from him. Their marriage was not a love match at all. Most likely, the prince could not have such a thing. His life was determined by the interests of the state, Since the engagement, the prince flatly refused to show the girl any signs of attention. He constantly avoided his bride. It got to the point that he even ordered her not to touch him under any circumstances. Her future husband turned out to be a completely different person than she had imagined before meeting him. The young man was not interested in anything except himself and his own interests. The prince was constantly looking for an opportunity not to be with his future wife. He used any reasons and excuses for this. If it happened that he spoke to her, the life of the future wife of the crown prince became unbearable in the palace. Her future husband constantly ignored her, and if he was near her, he tried to humiliate and insult her. At that moment, when the girl was having a particularly hard time, she remembered her own family. The future princess imagined the faces of her parents and brother, who were very proud. But unfortunately, everything went completely differently than she imagined and sometimes planned. That bloody night turned her life in a completely opposite direction. Instead of being in the royal chambers, instead of a luxurious royal dress decorated with gold and diamonds, she was dressed in dark, heavy, rough clothes. Instead of wide stained glass windows, she saw a small, barred, dirty window. Her bed was a wooden Beniti, that was the name of our main character, could not sleep, neither day nor night. The food brought to her also did not go down her throat, and what was brought to her could hardly be called the food she was. Suddenly, the girl was brought out of her deep thoughts by someone's voice calling her by name. Until that time, no one had visited her except for the strict guards. They treated her with extreme cruelty due to the fact that the failed princess recognized her best friend in the newcomer. Almost crying from a date with a loved one, she was glad that at least someone had dared to come to her. To make sure that this was not a fantasy, the girl's friend, who was imprisoned, was called Rosalie. She was one of the ladies-in-waiting at the royal palace. The girls, who had known each other before, had become very close friends. It was already clear from the prisoner's appearance that something was wrong with her. Just a couple of days ago, her beautiful face had turned into a terrible mask. Lack of sleep and food, as well as the girl told her that she could not remember anything since she had gone to bed. She had simply drunk the wine that the maid had given her. And then she fell into a deep sleep, and only the cries of the maid brought her out of it. The prisoner guessed what her friend had in her basket. She pulled the napkin off and took out something wrapped in paper. She said it was a sandwich made with her own hands and began to hold it out towards the iron grate. Hoping that she would receive her usual food from her friend, the girl was very happy. Communication with a person close to her awakened feelings of hunger in her. In addition, she was intrigued by the smell of the sandwich brought. How hungry she was. The friends looked into each other's eyes through the iron bars that separated them. When Beniti was about to grab the bundle offered to her, it fell out of her hand. The sandwich, wrapped in paper, fell loudly onto the stone floor of the prison cell. The echo of its fall rang out loudly under the ceiling of the dungeon. Looking into her friend's eyes, the prisoner did not notice a drop of regret about what had happened. Exulting and happy, she stepped on the sandwich with her boot and crushed it with her soul. The smell from it spread throughout the princess watched in amazement as her friend treated the food she had brought her cruelly. The girl was terribly surprised by her friend's behavior. She couldn't understand why she did it. So she turned to Rosalie and asked what she did and why. She suddenly thought that her friend had gone crazy. Looking at her friend, she saw an evil smile on her twisted lips. In her eyes, the feelings of malice and hatred were replaced by an evil mockery. The prisoner realized that her friend was happy with the situation. After looking at the prisoner for a long time and triumphing in her soul, the newcomer finally laughed loudly. Her laughter resounded loudly under the vaults of the high prison cell. To the princess's surprise, "Finally, now I will get a decent place. If you only knew how disgusted I was to listen to your complaints about how you did not like your position at all. I hope you like your current position much more." The princess watched her friend's face, twisted with anger, through the prison bars in surprise. She couldn't understand the reasons for her former friend's reaction. She couldn't understand what. Coming as close as possible to the bars, the princess's friend whispered that she now understood that it was all worth it. And then she added that she had waited for this for so long. Finally, it all ended well. The poor prisoner could not understand what her former friend was talking about. Clenching her fists until they hurt, she could not imagine what she could have done. Doomed to a quick execution, she shouted at her friend and asked what she had done. In response, the girl with red hair told her that she was to blame for everything that had happened. She deserved what was coming to her very soon with all her behavior. Very soon, she would be taken to the central square of the city and executed there. The poor princess was terrified by these words. She caught her breath from the unexpected confession of the one she considered her best friend. She, in turn, as if nothing had happened, then, with a sneer on her lips and a voice that was full of hatred, the newcomer told the prisoner to enjoy her sandwich. After these words, she stepped once more with the heel of her boots on the previously crushed sandwich. The gloating girl could not calm down and tried to pour out as much bile as possible with her snake tongue. Smiling at the end, she said that she was very pleased to know that the young girl's last supper was made by her own hands. Beniti, annoyed by the words spoken by her guest, could not hide her disappointment and fear. Grasping the iron bars with her hands and pressing her cold cheeks against them, in response, the departing girl did not even bother to turn her head in her direction. She was not going to answer the question posed to her. She was glad that her former best friend was now in a dark, cold cell. Well, that was what she was. Then the guest paused for a moment, as if pondering something for a long time. She wanted to sting the poor, exhausted prisoner of the royal dungeon even more painfully. With a contemptuous smile, she turned back and told the girl, and so the former failed princess found herself where she now was. With her hands tied and kneeling in the middle of the scaffold, she awaited the royal execution. From all sides, the girl doomed to death could not listen to all this calmly. Thoughts were whirling in her head. In order not to be afraid of execution, she would try to find the reasons why she ended. She didn't understand who in the palace she had managed to offend so much in such a short time. She tried to maintain warm, friendly relations with everyone. No one could complain about her unworthy attitude towards themselves. The girl wanted to cover her ears with her hands so as not to hear the cries from the crowd, which were filled with malice and hatred towards her. But her hands were also tied. In order not to see the people burning with hatred towards her, the cries demanding the immediate execution of the girl became louder and more intolerable. The poor, doomed girl was preparing for death. The executioner was also ready to fulfill his duty. The final preparations for the execution of the princess were underway. The executioner's assistant was also not idle. He climbed down from the scaffold and approached the cart standing nearby. Then he pulled one edge of the blanket, and from under the silent horror overcame the girl when her eyes opened to the entire cart, from which the executioner's assistant pulled off the covers covered in fresh blood. The princess recognized the bodies of. First, she saw a hand, on which was the family ring. This hand, like the body of the 3 victims of the executioner, was covered in dark, dried blood. Then, in the corner nearby, the girl saw the heads of. The eyes of the next victim of the royal executioner were filled with cold horror. She had just realized that she had lost her entire family before. Tears of regret flowed from her eyes. The faces of her living brother, father, and mother appeared before her eyes. The girl looked down at the bodies of her murdered relatives. She thought that this was the last time they would be so close to each other. Memories of a former happy life appeared before the eyes of a young girl sentenced to death. Her family had always been very difficult and kind. She remembered with warmth the moments of happiness in the family circle. The girl looked forward with a doomed expression from the height of the royal scaffold. So this is what her betraying friend had meant when she said that she would soon learn everything about the fate of her relatives. She was unable to concentrate because of the various thoughts that came into her head from nowhere. They opened her eyes wide. She thought about what her family had done. The slow steps of the king's executioner were heard behind her. The scaffold boards creaked under his feet. The girl felt the executioner's sword cutting through the air, which whistled inexorably over her head. With her hands folded in front of her in prayer, the girl began to wait for the outcome that was inexorable for her. She was mentally prepared for death. When death inexorably approached her, the girl remembered for a moment what had happened to her during her stay in the prison cell. A memory of notes appeared in her head. With all these worries, at the moment of execution, the princess remembered another visitor who came to her in the dark prison cell. When her situation seemed completely hopeless and there was no one else to turn to for help, a completely unexpected guest came to her. She was visited by the sister. Just before the girl's execution, the princess came to her in prison. She told her that there was very little time left and she had to act very quickly. The girl asked the prisoner to listen. Then the princess handed the girl a scroll with some papers through the iron bars. As she explained to the girl, on those sheets were notes of a song, and she had to sing this song during her execution. The princess hoped that these notes could. Then she told about the purpose of these mysterious notes. His Highness, the deceased brother of the princess, was given them by a witch. She also told him that this item could change an unfair. Holding out the scroll with the notes into the girl's hand, the princess once again asked her to be sure to be precise and attentive while singing the song. With tears in her eyes, she begged the girl not to forget to sing this song when the sword of the unjust executioner rises above her head. And now, kneeling with her hands tied, the girl remembered the promise she had given to the princess. Overcoming the pain and self-pity, she began to sing this. Humming the tune of this song, she imagined that everything that was happening to her now was just a dream. She thought that if she were born again, she would never live her life this way. She would definitely. Meanwhile, the bloodthirsty cries from the crowd surrounding her scaffold became louder and more disgusting. People to whom she had done nothing wrong in life demanded that she be executed as soon as possible. Beniti really wanted the song she sang to help her stay alive. The rag that bound her mouth made it very difficult to sing, but she still tried to sing as loudly as possible, without missing a single. The events of her life began to flash before the princess's eyes. First, she saw her husband's bloody body spread out on the floor. Then it was replaced by a vision of the one who had betrayed her. The girl clearly saw the face of her friend, who had been so happy about her impending death, and who had had a hand in her unjust accusation. The next thing the dying princess saw was her mother's bloody hand with the family ring hanging from the royal executioner's carriage. She experienced all the events as if in a terrible dream. It seemed to her that the world had become completely different, and she was falling into hell. The girl opened her eyes and saw that she was lying in her native bed in her native father's house. She was shaking all over from the nightmares she had experienced. Her eyes were tear-stained after long sobs. her new life given to her by the note. Beniti woke up from the loud scream of her maid. She opened her eyes, remembering her recent nightmare. Could it all have been just a dream? Tears were running down the girl's eyes and cheeks. She couldn't calm down. The girl continued to lie there, staring at the ceiling. To her relief and indescribable happiness, she recognized the vaults of the room well. She was now in her favorite bed in her parents' house. The girl wanted to know if she had dreamed it or if she had really been saved by the notes, and she was transported back to her past. She thought that it would take some time to be sure of this. The maid asked the girl, who was still lying on her bed, how she was feeling. Everyone in the house was very worried because she had not come to her senses for a long time. Everyone was even more alarmed because they thought she would never wake up again. The girl still could not believe in the reality of what had happened to her. Now in front of her was her old servant, her favorite maid, whose name was Tasha. She did not stop talking and tried to. The girl, still lying on the bed, began to think. It seemed that all the recent events that the maid had told her about confirmed that the notes had been able to save her. All the events seemed very real and were confirmed by her memories from the past. Not remembering herself from joy and happiness, the girl jumped up, ran to her maid, and hugged her tightly around the neck. Thanks to the notes brought by the princess, she was able to save herself from inevitable death at the hands of the royal executioner. The maid, crushed in her mistress's arms, could not utter a word. She wondered what could have made such an impression on her mistress. Never before had she expressed her. The girl continued to cling to the body of the stunned maid. She hung her whole body on her neck and asked her to confirm that it was just a bad dream and that she had dreamed all of this. The poor maid could not understand what had happened to her poor mistress. She saw tears on her cheeks, and she could not understand what could have caused such a reaction from her mistress. She asked the girl again if she had had a nightmare. In response, she thought about the question for a long time. She herself wanted to believe that it was just a nightmare. Pleased with this thought, the girl brightened up considerably. She looked intently into the eyes of her maid and agreed that perhaps she had only had a bad dream. Suddenly, there was a noise from behind the door. Someone was clearly in a hurry to break into her bedroom. Then they both heard someone calling the young mistress's name loudly. Then suddenly the door opened sharply and a breathless young man ran into the room. He quickly ran into the room and, having regained his breath, asked the girl if she had already woken up and when this had happened. The mistress, standing next to her maid, could not say a word. It seemed as if she had become speechless at the sight of her own brother. She was dumbfounded, as if after meeting a ghost. She continued to gaze at the young man's face in surprise and could not utter a word. Looking at him for a long time, she again saw the young man lying in the executioner's cart before her. Finally, having made sure that it was her still living brother standing before her, the girl ran towards him as fast as she could and hung herself on the surprised young man's neck. She greeted him with a joyful cry. The young man, like the maid before him, could not understand the reason for such a violent expression of feelings. Therefore, he turned to the maid to explain his sister's behavior. The brother asked the girl to calm down. He said that he was very worried about her health because he was told that she had recently had an unfortunate fall from a horse. The girl, hearing his words, went into her thoughts again. She began to remember the fall from the horse, and nothing came to her mind. The brother, he knelt down at her foot and began to examine her. The girl's ankle was bandaged tightly. At the same time, the maid tried to explain the unusual behavior of her mistress. She decided that she had slept for a long time after. Beniti was still thinking about what she had heard from her brother and the maid. It seemed strangely familiar to her that they had told her about falling from a horse. She seemed to have had a very similar experience in her life. When the girl was 17 years old, she was riding a horse. Due to her carelessness, she fell off it and sprained her ankle. The girl began to recall the events that followed her fall. At the same time, she was chosen as a candidate for the bride of the crown prince. She needed to find confirmation of her thoughts. She began to rush around the room and finally found confirmation in the calendar. Now everything became clear to her. Thanks to the notes, one returned a week. Having analyzed all the events and facts again, the girl realized that thanks to the notes, she was able to return to the past. So, the princess did not deceive her? Or was it just a bad dream? No, it was hardly a dream. With all her senses, she felt that she had been able to return to the past again and had received a chance to change something in the fate of her relatives and herself. The girl understood that everything that had happened to her before was real. She had really been sentenced to death. But thanks to the princess's intervention, the witch's notes gave her a chance to change her. Then the girl tried to understand how these notes ended up with the prince. Perhaps he knew about what was about to happen. The girl was confused in her thoughts. The girl could not understand the motives of the prince's actions. What could have motivated such a bad man, in her opinion, to help her? How could he have known that everything would happen the way it did? Thoughts haunted the young girl. Again and again, she returned in her thoughts to those days that were before her execution. She could not understand and forgive the reason for betraying her best friend. What could have prompted her to speak out against her? And how was she involved in her supposed crimes? Rosalie was once her best friend. The girl considered her her only real friend. She remembered how they had spent all their free time together so well. They could share their favorite, most cherished secrets with each other. Each of them rejoiced in the other's successes as if they were their own. And suddenly someone's shout brought the girl out of her thoughts. Someone called her name loudly. Well, she would return to her thoughts a little later. The brother, who was still examining the leg, asked the girl if she had hit her head because she was thinking for so long. It seemed to him that her thoughts were somewhere in the clouds. When she answered that it was nothing special, just trifles, when she was about to agree with him and lie down, she suddenly remembered her parents. Her brother noticed that they were also very worried about their daughter's injury. The worried girl quickly asked her brother where her parents were. He answered that they were talking with the doctor outside the house. Deciding that she needed to see them urgently, the girl looked out the window to see. Running to the window, she saw her father and mother peacefully talking about something with their attending physician. It seemed that the girl was the topic of their conversation. The doctor was telling something, and her father and mother were listening to him attentively. Looking at her parents' faces, the girl realized that they were caring specifically about her and were worried about her health. Suddenly, a cry escaped the lips of the excited girl. She decided that she absolutely had to greet them at that very moment, just as she had greeted her brother. The young mistress's brother screamed piercingly. After her recent action, he was seriously worried about her health. She had never acted like this before. The girl jumped out the window and ran quickly towards the target. She saw this target in front of her and did not want to lose sight of it. The girl's target was her own mother. Without wasting a minute after jumping out the window, the girl ran barefoot towards her parents. She didn't even feel the sharp stones under her feet. She wanted to cuddle up to her loved ones as soon as possible. The girl saw concern for herself in her father's eyes. It was obvious that he did not understand at all such strange changes in his own daughter's behavior. This was something. She quickly ran up to her father, grabbed him by the neck, and hung on his shoulders. The Duke was stunned by his daughter's sudden appearance in the courtyard of the house. He barely managed to come to his senses and asked the girl what had happened to her. She only remained silent in response, pressing her face to her father's chest. She wanted to cry from happiness because she saw her parents alive again. The mother, stunned by her daughter's behavior, began to loudly ask her what had prompted her daughter to behave in such a strange way. The doctor also noted that it was unacceptable to run barefoot on. While the girl still couldn't leave her father alone, their mother came up to them and asked her if the Duke's daughter could run around the garden barefoot. It was completely unacceptable for a girl of her position. The mother added that she also had an injury. It is unknown how this could affect the girl's health later. In response, the girl, who was happy to have living parents, could not answer anything. She stretched out her hand to her mother with the desire to embrace her and press her whole body against her. And the mother happily embraced her daughter in her strong embrace. The Duchess could not calm down, seeing her daughter in such a state. She turned to her with the question, what could have happened that she behaved in such an unusual way? In her mother's arms, the girl began to cry. She could not explain to her the reason for her strange behavior. Therefore, she referred to the fact that she was very scared. The daughter apologized to her parents. She was very sorry that she had upset them so much. She promised not to do anything like that again. In response, her father asked her when she would grow up. Beniti remembered that she had had a similar conversation with her parents before. Last time, she had promised to grow up as soon as possible. And now she repeated her promise again. When everyone had calmed down a bit, the father picked up his barefoot daughter and started to lead her to the house. At this time, she gave herself over to her thoughts and making plans for a picture of her previous life appeared before her. In that life, the crown prince had been cold and cruel to the girl. This life she wanted to take control of. The girl planned to change everything in her newfound life. She would have to fix everything, as the princess asked her to. And then her family would. The tireless Tasha brought a carriage for her mistress. The young mistress sat down in it, and together they drove to the house. The girl definitely needed a little rest from all the worries she had experienced. Her parents, who had calmed down a bit, and her equally restless brother, continued to watch their journey home. Everything seemed to have settled down. Having thanked the maid for everything, the girl was about to lock herself in her room and start making plans for the future. Her plans included saving her family from death. She had to prevent the upcoming tragedy by any means possible. Full of determination, Beniti sat down on her bed and planned her next steps to achieve her goals. No one should escape her punishment. Everyone will definitely answer for everything. In addition, she was going to find those who wanted to get rid of her family. They would inevitably be punished. Without yet knowing how, she was going to take revenge on all of them. Now she had to prepare. According to her plan, the girl was going to go to the city. On the way, she thought about how the bride selection process goes. When a prince is going to get married, many girls from prestigious families are gathered from all over. A qualified commission carries out a very careful selection of all potential brides gathered. As a result of the selection, only the 3 most suitable are left. But this is not the end of it. In the end, only 1 girl out of 3 chosen ones becomes the prince's bride. She then has to properly prepare for the performance of her duties. Another 2 years of special education for the bride of the crown prince must pass. Then, after completing her education program, she marries the prince at the age of 20. After the wedding, the girl enters the Ruby Palace, which is her and the prince's common residence. Lost in her thoughts, the girl did not notice how her carriage quickly drove up to the shops in the center of the capital. The footman helped her out of the carriage. She planned to visit several boutiques. She had to prepare herself well for the upcoming selection of the crown princess. After all, the selection ceremony of candidates was to begin in 2 days. Beniti approached the doors of the shopping boutiques. She was going to visit one of them, which belonged to a fashion designer named Mariana. Mariana Isabel was renowned as the finest fashion designer in the entire empire. This boutique was considered one of the largest boutiques in their capital and empire. It was the most popular among the city's nobility. Therefore, many people served there. The young duchess proudly entered the boutique door. Local maids lined up on both sides of the path, bowing before her. All were ready to help her choose her upcoming outfit with joy. The girl asked one of the maids to help her find a dress for the crown prince's bride selection ceremony. She happily agreed and said that she had to call the owner of the boutique. She was a little busy with her own affairs at the moment, but should be free soon. The young Duchess was offered some tea. Sitting on the sofa, she had to wait until the designer was free. The time of waiting passed completely unnoticed by the girl. As usual, she indulged in her plans. The girl planned to choose a dress for the ceremony that would be significantly different from the outfits of the others present. She set a goal to stun everyone. Then the designer appeared in the room and greeted the young Duchess. She told the girl that they had only seen each other a year ago, and that during that time the lady had grown up a lot. The girl also said that she remembered her previous visit to the designer. She and her mother visited her mansion then. She really liked the outfits from this couturier, and she would be happy to. Mariana said she would definitely try to find something suitable for the young Duchess. She thinks she has a couple of dresses that would suit her. The girl happily agreed to look at everything the designer had offered. When she said that they had almost finished sewing the girl's dress for the ceremony, she said that she would look at it later. No need to bring it. Then she added to the surprised woman that she did not need it. Therefore, it was necessary to immediately stop sewing the dress that was previously intended for the ceremony of selecting the bride of the crown. The designer asked the girl if she wanted to pick something for herself. She just happened to have a couple of great dresses. But unfortunately, she wouldn't be able to fulfill her request. The young Duchess was upset to hear that there was no way her request could be fulfilled. The designer told her that it was an order from her mother, the Duchess, and they could not break the deal with her. Laughing deliberately, the girl replied that then they should continue sewing the dress for her. She thought that one of the points of the plan would definitely need to be corrected. Continuing to drink tea, the girl told the designer that she would not wear this dress, but she was not going to contradict her mother either. Let her think about what her daughter would wear to the ceremony. This is the dress they had ordered earlier. The designer began to search for the right words to answer the young girl. She said that she did not think that Miss was so stubborn. She should think carefully about choosing a dress. As far as she knew, other candidates already. Then the designer added that it would be very difficult to make something better than what they had ordered before. Her customer asked to show her something more fashionable and modern. While the designer was thinking about what she could offer this girl, she began to think. She was going to choose the most pretentious dress. And if it also turned out to be tasteless, it would be the ultimate dream of the young Duchess. When asked by the designer whether she wanted to wear a fancy dress to the upcoming ceremony, the girl nodded affirmatively and laughed. Yes, in her opinion, that was exactly what it should be. Another added that the outfit had to be eye-catching. Everyone around had to pay attention to the dress and the girl wearing it. She was going to amaze everyone with her appearance. The girl was immediately presented with several outfits that, in the designer's opinion, were worthy of her choice. But unfortunately, none of them could satisfy her exquisite taste. When it seemed that her plans were once again destined to fail and she would not be able to find a suitable dress for the ceremony, the girl noticed a suitable dress hidden in the depths. Her eyes sparkled at the unexpected find. She happily asked the designer what the dress she liked was called. She thought it was exactly what she was looking for. It looked charming. The designer thought for a moment and then said that the dress was called Golden Wave. But in her opinion, it would not be a very suitable outfit for the Crown Prince's bride selection ceremony. She thought the girl should think about it some more. But the young Duchess did not want to hear any objections. This was exactly what she had been looking for. This outfit should be a suitable weapon for the ceremony. She told the designer that she was taking this dress. When the shopping was over, the girl said goodbye to the designer and her maids. Leaving the boutique, she felt completely satisfied. Her mother, of course, but by that time the ceremony will be over. Everything will be decided as the young Duchess wants. The girl turned back for a moment, noticed the intent gaze of the fashion designer. It seemed to her that there was a hint of cunning in the woman's eyes. The Duchess began to peer intently into the face and eyes of the woman who was escorting her out of the boutique. Turning back once more, the girl looked and thought that perhaps she had just imagined it. The designer looked as usual now. Perhaps it was just the look of a salesperson who was grateful for a purchase in her shop. On a clear, sunny, and warm day, the ducal house was completely silent. Everyone was busy with their usual affairs. Nothing could disturb the peace of the young Duchess. Suddenly, the complete silence was broken by the scream of the maid, who burst into an inhuman scream, addressing her mistress. Seeing something unusual in the window, she wanted to share it with her young mistress. Then the maid informed the young Duchess that someone had come for her. The imperial family had sent them a carriage in which they were to travel to the upcoming ceremony. The girl went to the window to also look at the arriving carriage. The servant, who was chatting tirelessly, told her that the ceremony would soon begin. The young Duchess stubbornly and sullenly remained silent in response. She was immersed in her sad thoughts. It was hard for the girl to even remember how many misfortunes awaited her ahead after the trip in the imperial carriage. While her mistress was looking out the window and thinking about something of her own, the maid never tired of admiring the carriage's exterior. It looked simply delightful, in her opinion. At last, her young mistress enjoyed looking at the carriage and asked her why she was so happy. She replied that she was very happy for her mistress, who would now visit the king's palace. Well, at least someone was happy for her. Unfortunately, the girl was not at all happy about the prospect of visiting the imperial palace. She knew that nothing good. Looking again at her maid, the Duchess thought how good it was that at least someone was happy about the events that were happening. She herself had absolutely no reason to be happy. She knew very well from her last visit to the palace that this would have very dire consequences for her family. She could not share her memories with the chattering maid. Looking up dreamily, the girl informed the stunned maid that she would also be going with her to the imperial palace. She would accompany her on the trip. You should have seen the poor maid's face at that moment. Smiling at her, the girl said that of course they would go together. She couldn't go to the imperial palace without taking her best friend with her. Or perhaps she was planning to go there without her mistress. In response, the grateful and wobbly maid replied that she was very grateful to her mistress for the honor. She would be happy to accompany her and stay close to her during her visit to the palace. The maid was in a state of euphoria from the happiness that had suddenly fallen on her head. She chattered incessantly with her mistress. Of course, she was going to the imperial palace. Hearing the last phrase, the young Duchess noted to herself that the maid did not remember the last time she was in the palace, but she remembered that visit in her past life. The girl remembered that last time she and the maid were wearing their best clothes. Last time she and the maid visited the city for the first time. So they tried to see everything and excitedly looked around the whole area. The young Duchess turned to her maid and said that she would have a rather unusual request of her. She should not be surprised and unquestioningly carry out what she was ordered. The surprised maid heard from her mistress that she had to dress in her most shabby and old clothes. That would be her order. In response to the maid's question whether she shouldn't dress in her best, namely shabby clothes, the girl was forced to disappoint her maid and said that yes, that's exactly how it should be. Then the young Duchess went on and told her maid, who was stunned by this news, that she should put on the ugliest clothes she had. The maid continued to stand in front of her mistress, unable to move. It seemed that she did not like the idea of dressing in the worst clothes at all. Then, finally, the maid pulled herself together and told her mistress that this would not do at all. She did not want to be dressed in rags. The young Duchess wondered why the maid was so reluctant to fulfill her request. The maid's voice trembled with excitement. She said that if she dressed as her mistress asked, the other maids would look down on her. Then the maid added that she could endure everything for her mistress, but it would also be a disgrace to the Duchess herself. She would be judged by her maid. The girl thought about it. She could not have foreseen this at all. She did not want her former friend to suffer from her idea. The young Duchess's idea was to look as extravagant and ignorant as possible. She also planned to dress her maid as an ordinary beggar, but she completely forgot that she could have her own feelings. The girl never thought that her maid could be so stubborn. Deciding to stick to her plan, the girl said that the maid should just follow her order because there is a reason for it. But how difficult it was for the young Duchess to convince her stubborn maid. She kept insisting that it was impossible because there would be other maids there. Moreover, among these maids, there would be an acquaintance of hers who would not miss the opportunity. The maid could not calm down and brought up her arguments in favor of new and neat clothes. She did not want anyone to discuss and speak badly about her mistress. Then she said that among those who would definitely be at the selection of the crown princess, there would be one familiar maid. She would definitely start discussing both the mistress and her maid. It seemed that they had their. After some thought, the girl agreed with her maid. She decided that nothing could be done and told the maid that she could choose her best clothes. The maid, satisfied with the mistress's positive decision for herself, cried out loudly with joy. She immediately thanked her and said that now she could fully count on her. And under no circumstances would she disgrace her during the selection of the crown princess. The maid said that she was running to change her clothes, and in that same instant she disappeared from her field of vision. The girl thought that it was simply unimaginable how quickly the expression on her servant's face could change. The two girls left the ducal home and headed towards the imperial carriage waiting for them. The young duchess strictly ordered her maid not to lose the suitcase with her things under any circumstances. The curious girl did not miss the opportunity to look into the suitcase in her hand. Seeing another dress there, she asked her mistress why she needed a change of clothes. Without going into details, the young hostess replied that she would find out about everything a little later. She smiled and said that she wanted to arrange a small surprise. When both girls were about to step onto the carriage steps, someone called out to them from behind. When they turned to look at the person who had called out to them, they saw the Duchess approaching them. The worried woman approached them and asked her daughter if she wanted her mother to go with her to the imperial palace. She was afraid that the girl would not be able to cope without her. Her daughter laughed merrily in response and said that of course she could handle it, because she was already 17 years old. She had already become a real lady. The mother nevertheless decided to give her some last instructions before the journey. She asked her daughter to be careful and behave with dignity. With a sweet smile, the girl immediately agreed. Well, in fact, she had no intention of listening to her mother's advice. In fact, she wanted to do the opposite. The Duchess looked with excitement into the distance as the carriage moved away along the road. Inside the carriage sat her daughter and thought that soon she would have to cast aside all her dignity. Having settled comfortably on the seat of the imperial carriage, the maid immediately began to feel its upholstery with her finger. Then she could not hide her delight and shouted loudly about how soft the seat was in the emperor's carriage. The young duchess looked at her maid in surprise. How excited her maid looked, as if she had just entered society for the first time. To somehow bring her to her senses, she pretended to want to fall asleep, yawned, and asked the maid to stop behaving like that. In addition, she also told the maid that she was behaving like a real country bumpkin, which made the emotional girl very angry. Having calmed down a little, the maid assumed a thoughtful expression and asked her mistress how she looked now. Then she began to sing songs about the unhappy love of princes and princesses. All this cheered up and made the Duchess laugh. If anyone had decided to approach the imperial carriage at that moment, they would have heard the booming sounds of laughter coming from inside it. When the two girls' journey came to an end, they found themselves in a huge square in front of the imperial palace. The poor maid was so surprised that she even opened her mouth. The imperial palace amazed everyone who looked at it with its enormous size and exquisite splendor. It had an incredible beauty that beckoned to itself. The architects also worked hard on the arrangement of the square in front of the palace. Beautiful fountains were built throughout its territory. The space between them was arranged with flower beds with roses from different countries and different varieties. The girls approached the palace's ornately gilded entrance door. It was incredibly large, as if giants lived in the house. The imperial palace itself appeared just as huge before the girls' eyes. They were enchanted by the multi-story building with its large number of stained glass windows. The Duchess did not think that it could be so huge. A large fountain was built right in front of the palace. The water flowing from it reached the level of the second floor of the building. The maid who came here for the first time could not hide her surprise at what she saw. She said that she had never seen such a big fountain. The maid did not close her mouth for a moment. At the same time, her mistress thought that other people would be very surprised when they first saw such a talkative maid. When the girls entered, the maid raised her head and could not hide her cries of admiration at the sight of the chandeliers that adorned the ceiling of the palace. The young Duchess confidently continued her way through the palace corridors. She did not slow down for a minute. The maid thought it strange that her mistress was moving so confidently in such an unfamiliar place. She asked the girl how she knew the way so well if she had come here for the first time today. The maid added that her mistress moved as if she had been here often. In response, the girl said that it was time for her to learn to keep quiet. And if she did not, she would immediately go back home. The Duchess was looking for a place where she could change her clothes. She knew it well. The fifth library of the main palace contains mainly philosophical books. That's why. And now the doors of the fifth library were in front of both girls. They could safely enter inside without fear. Seeing her mistress enter a room, the maid froze in fear. She turned to her mistress and asked her what she was planning. In response, the girl took the suitcase with another dress from the hands of the frightened maid and asked her to wait there without going anywhere. She quietly asked the maid not to worry about anything and informed her that she would be back soon. The stunned maid remained standing at the door and waiting for her mistress, who had gone off somewhere into the depths of the library. The maid's face clearly showed signs of her anxiety and worry. She was worried that someone might see them wandering into the depths of the imperial palace without permission. She was so suddenly the fear on the maid's face changed to real horror when she saw someone approaching. Something or someone scared her very much. The maid's eyes were frozen in cold horror at what she saw. What could she possibly see there? Just like the Duchess's maid, a couple of people who wandered into the fifth library of the imperial palace at that time were surprised. They looked amazed and were indignant, remembering God. Others present wondered who this was and whether she had really gone mad. This was exactly the reaction the young Duchess was looking for. She was very pleased that this was the way people reacted to her appearance in her new dress. The girl appeared majestically in a dress that she had bought in a boutique without her mother knowing. The yellow dress sparkled with an exquisite shine from the large number of precious stones. The girl was pleased with the effect. The maid quickly ran up to her mistress and told her that her dress was too provocative. If she did not change to what she had on, they would be laughed at first. In response, the young Duchess laughed and said that her maid did not understand modern fashion at all. She would know better what to wear to the selection of royal brides. The poor maid continued to insist. Your mother, the Duchess, ordered that you behave with dignity and elegance. I still insist that you wear the dress in which you arrived at the palace. The young mistress's answer seemed completely crazy to her maid. She thought that her mistress had gone mad. The girl answered her that this was the only way to show her dignity to the imperial family. The poor maid was beside herself with all this. She did not understand what had happened to her mistress, who always had such good taste. At that moment, the girl thought to herself that it would be good if everyone noticed her in this dress. She wanted everyone to see her bad taste and bad upbringing. This is the purpose for which she was chosen. She was counting on the fact that no one would like the bejeweled, decorated dress. It was needed so that she would be immediate. To do this, the girl brought another dress to the palace and changed before the ceremony. It was supposed to be the reason for the exclusion of the young Duchess from the competition. And now, deep in her soul, the young Duchess was triumphant. It seemed that her idea had justified itself. Everyone around her was discussing nothing but her dress and its own. The maid approached her mistress to tell her that her dress was too provocative. She could not appear in front of the imperial family like that. In response, the young Duchess laughed and said that her maid had no business sticking her nose into other people's business. She had better do her direct duties. The poor maid did not agree with her mistress. For the first time in her life, she allowed herself to be angry with the girl. The young mistress's answer seemed completely crazy to her maid. She thought for the umpteenth time that her mistress had gone mad. And she looked strange. At this moment, the girl thought that it would be good for everyone to notice her in this dress. She wanted everyone to see her bad taste and bad upbringing. She chose this dress for this purpose. It was supposed to shine brighter than the imperial chandeliers on the ceiling. She expected that no one would like the deliberately decorated dress. Having calmed her maid, the girl went with her to the selection site. She ordered her to calm down and assured her that everything would be fine. The young Duchess thought that now it was all beginning. Ahead of her was a real test, in which she wanted to be a loser. Now she wished with all her. She grabbed the door handle firmly with both hands and boldly pushed it forward in front of her. Entering the hall, the girl decided to remember everything that had happened to her at the previous selection, in which, unfortunately, she had become the winner. The huge room was illuminated by thousands of chandeliers. Despite the fact that it was daytime, dozens of candles were lit in each of the chandeliers. All the gilding in the castle's interior sparkled. The young Duchess walked quickly down the steps of the palace hall. Then she slowed down her gait so that everyone present could get a good look at her provocative dress. It seems she managed to achieve the maximum effect with her dress. When she appeared on the parquet floor of the hall in her decorated dress, all the girls who were present at the selection, the usual gossip and chatter began. Each of the girls, stunned by her dress, wanted to discuss it with the one standing next to her. Her once best friend also did not fail to glance back at the provocatively decorated dress of the young Duchess. Bewilderment was visible in her eyes. The girl thought that everything was going perfectly. This was exactly the reaction she had expected. Her crazy idea had worked. Each of the girls present asked herself what had happened to the young Duchess. Everyone considered her crazy. No one could understand how someone could wear such a provocative dress to the crown princess selection ceremony. Then one of the Empress's ladies-in-waiting appeared in the hall. The Countess stepped forward and announced the arrival of Her Majesty the Empress. Everyone froze in silent anticipation. The wife of the most important person in their state walked slowly into the room. The woman was very stylishly dressed. Her dress was the complete opposite of the young duchess's dress. Despite her age, the empress looked very good. She could have been given 10 years younger than her age. The woman did not have any unnecessary decorations. All the girls who came to the ceremony bowed, greeting their mistress. The duchess was lucky to be the first in a row of her kind. The girl knew a lot about the empress. She knew that the empress was graceful and beautiful. Despite her high status, she behaved very modestly, but she was certainly not merciful. Despite her sweet appearance, the empress was always ready to ask sharp and unpleasant questions. It would be very unlucky for anyone whom she would list as her enemy. The girl was sure that the empress was holding not a rose but a sharpened dagger. The empress greeted them and said loudly that she was glad to share this beautiful morning with everyone who had come. In response, the girls who came to the selection also greeted their empress. They loudly declared for all to hear that they were very glad to see her. It was a great honor for them to contemplate their mistress. The elderly countess, who was considered the main manager of the selection, came forward and announced that all the girls should introduce themselves in turn. The young duchess waited her turn to tell the empress her name. She recalled the points of the plan according to which she was now going to act. Last time, when she was at the crown princess selection, she was choosing her eloquent words, thinking about every word she said. Now she decided to act completely differently. Opening her mouth, she began to say her name as loudly as possible. Hello, the only daughter of the Raishi family. My name is Beneath. The other girls fell silent in surprise when they heard her greeting. She said it so loudly that they were ready to cover their ears. The stern countess looked intently into the girl's face. She was perplexed by such a short and loud greeting. The old woman then asked the duchess if that was all she was willing to tell those present at the selection about herself today. If there was anything else she would like to add about herself. In response, the girl happily said that she had already told everything about herself. She had nothing more to add to this. Then the empress came closer to both of the conversationalists. With a smile on her lips, she noticed that the young duchess had a very loud and cheerful greeting. This is very unusual for such a girl. Meanwhile, the old countess continued to get acquainted with the other participants of the selection. Each of them gave her name and told something about herself to the others. For a long time, greetings and introductions from the girls who came from all over the country to take part in the selection could be heard between the vaults of the ceiling of the imperial palace. Well, then the same old countess, who was the main organizer of the competition, announced to everyone that they would now begin the exam. She ordered everyone to follow her. The girls followed the woman and came to a narrow corridor. Along the corridor, there was a row of doors, behind which were hidden separate rooms for each girl. Beniti carefully examined the place where they were brought. It seemed to her that this place itself made people nervous and afraid of the greatness of the imperial family. Long prepared to answer any questions posed, the young duchess peered intently into the elderly countess's face. It was not the first time she had taken part in this difficult examination. The woman asked the girl if she was ready for the exam. After she answered in the affirmative, she said it was time to start. It seemed that the old woman had a hard time trying to sit down in the chair. She began to sit down slowly, holding her back. She groaned a little in pain. And finally, she managed. At this point, the duchess, who had decided to win the countess over with her ignorant behavior, began to laugh loudly. She wanted to show with her whole appearance how fun. The examinee and the examiner found themselves facing each other. The old woman sat up straight, holding her back straight. Opposite her, a very young girl. The Countess noticed how the girl was sitting. She took the time to point out to the girl that her posture was very bad, and she asked if she could sit up straight. The girl didn't think long about the question posed to her. She answered that her back hurt. She tried to show with her whole appearance how much pain she was in at that moment. When the Countess asked if she should call someone who could give the girl an injection, she answered that perhaps it was not worth it. Satisfied with her answer, the Countess said that they would now begin the exam. The girl should be attentive when answering the questions, answer clearly and loudly. The girl immediately began to tremble, as if from a chill. She could not be stopped. The Countess could not understand what was happening, and so she asked the girl what had happened. In response, the girl said that she was asking for forgiveness, but she couldn't do anything about it. She has this habit of shaking her legs when she is a little scared. The Countess was irritated by the girl's answer and ordered her to stop. The old woman was angry. She felt that this young flirt had allowed herself to mock her. The girl apologized again, still shaking, and said that she couldn't get rid of her habit. The elderly woman stood up with difficulty, leaning on the table placed in front of the chair. She decided to stop the girl being examined from trembling herself. To do this, the Countess grabbed the young lady's shoulder with her hand and began to hold her tightly. Grabbing the girl tightly with both hands, she asked her if she needed a sedative injection. For a moment, the Duchess calmed down from surprise and stopped trembling. Seeing the smile on the old woman's eyes, the Duchess wondered if she had gone too far with her trembling. The Countess announced to the girl that they should first test her knowledge of history. She asked her if she had seen the fountain in front of the palace. The woman asked the girl to explain the purpose and reason for building the fountain in the courtyard of the palace. The young Duchess knew the name of this fountain very well. It was called Brave Women. When Emperor Alendra was fighting the dragon, some women came to the battlefield to hand out gunpowder and weapons to the soldiers. All these women were turned into ashes. The honor of their deed was what the imperial fountain was called. The girl knew all this, so she answered the woman sitting in front of her that it was a great fountain of desires. Surprised by her answer, the Countess asked again why the girl thought so. Without thinking long about the answer, the young lady replied that usually people make wishes at a fountain, so this one is also a fountain of wishes. She then continued that if he is the biggest in the empire, then he helps to fulfill people's most cherished dreams. To say that the woman was upset by the girl's answer would be to say nothing. The Countess looked ahead sullenly. She then turned to the girl, who was feeling at ease during the exam, and asked why there were wings on the coat of arms of their empire. The answer to this question was also well known to the girl. When the emperor defeated the dragon, a curse fell on the imperial family, which would disappear only with them. It was known to all that the cursed child would gain special powers. However, he would eventually die because he was unable to control them. This was the curse of the emperor. That is why many of the heirs died. They died before reaching adulthood. Only those who did not have a special gift survived. But there was also a belief that an emperor would be born who would defeat the curse. After that, he would be given the opportunity to revive the most abandoned way. This went on for quite a long time. But then at some point, the princes stopped dying, and people thought that the dragon's curse had disappeared. This is written about in detail in the book History of the Empire, which is required reading for every nobleman. Every detail of the book was familiar to the Duchess, but she answered the question incorrectly, saying that the wings did not mean that the dragon was no more. The Duchess calmly listened to the Countess's message that she had answered incorrectly. In fact, the wings are a symbol of the dragon's curse. The elderly woman advised the girl to reread The History of the Empire. Then she added that the test of her knowledge of history was over. Then the Countess turned to the girl with a completely unexpected question and asked when her birthday was. When she heard that she was born on December 12th, she said that meant she was born on the same day as the star. For some reason, the woman's question discouraged the young Duchess. Why would she need to know such details from her life? The Countess continued to ask the most absurd questions. She asked the Duchess what she was doing on her 8th birthday. The girl answered, "Does the Countess herself remember this?" To which she received a rather rude answer that it is not she who asked the questions here. The Countess added that the girl knew what would happen if she broke the rules. In response, the girl laughed and said that she would probably be excluded from the selection ceremony. The Countess did not confirm this. She said that the girl would not be expelled. A completely different kind of punishment awaited her. The Countess moved as close to the girl as she could and whispered threateningly that she could be accused of disrespecting the imperial family. Without stopping, the woman continued that if the accusation was proven, then Beniti said that this was the first time she had heard of such a thing. She asked the woman if this had always been the rule or... Then the girl dared to suggest that this rule had just been invented by the Countess herself. The eyes of the insulted Countess turned red from the anger raging inside her. But she still restrained herself and only said that no lady had ever behaved so thoughtlessly in front of the girl during an exam. She continued and added that the girl should think very carefully about her behavior. After all, there is a very big difference between ignorance and carelessness. And again, for some reason, threats came from the maid of honor, which surprised the young lady. Standing up and beginning to walk around the room, the Countess continued to say that if the girl continued to behave like this, she would be forced to ask the minister to file a lawsuit for disrespect on her. The Duchess noticed that the woman was very angry. The Empress's servants are her face. Therefore, insulting the Countess can be equated to insulting Her Majesty. Then the girl decided that she needed to get kicked out for her terrible behavior. She said that she thought the Countess had asked her to tell her about her 8th birthday. The girl said that she did not understand what her interlocutor wanted to hear from her. She continued to think why the Countess was threatening her if she could simply exclude her from the selection of crown princesses. To her question, the Empress's lady-in-waiting replied that it was normal not to remember all the details of one's childhood. She asked the girl to think about the most vivid moments of her birthday. The girl began to think carefully about her answer. She tried to remember what was bright. She even wanted to ignore this question. For some reason, the girl began to think that this question was not at all random, and yet she tried to answer it. Standing at the window and looking out, the Countess waited for an answer. What happened to the girl on her 8th birthday? Looking at the old woman's back, the girl could think of nothing better to say than, did she really think that something was supposed to happen to her when she was 8 years old? The woman said that she had no idea what the girl was talking about. How could she know what was happening to her there? Then the girl asked what the question was about. The Countess's answer killed the Duchess on the spot. It turns out that it was just part of the exam, and that her memory was being tested in this way. In the main hall of the palace, candles continued to burn in tall chandeliers, but it was noticeably quieter than before the exam. Evening was approaching. At the end of her ordeal, the young Duchess walked out of the corridor with the rooms into the Great Hall. At this time, it was already empty. The girl thought about what had happened at the exam. She noticed that after it, Countess Alika began to behave strangely. She spoke incoherently and constantly made mistakes. She couldn't understand at all what could have influenced this cold-blooded woman so much. Could it really be that she had driven her to this state with her behavior? Already leaving the banquet hall, the girl thought that she would need to find out more about this at home. The Duchess had changed her clothes and was about to leave, her hand on the door handle, when at the last moment she remembered something. She had completely forgotten about her. To the Duchess's great surprise, she found her maid quietly snoring on a bench near the imperial palace. The situation that had arisen seemed very funny to the girl. She quickly jumped up to the sleeping maid and woke her up with a loud shout. Tired of waiting so long for her mistress, Tasha was glad to hear that all the exams were over. Beniti handed her maid the suitcase containing her impressive dress and said that it was time for them to go home. When she turned around to call the maid, something caught her eye that really interested her. From afar, the girl saw the familiar red hair of her friend. And while she was talking to someone in the garden, the girls quickly ran past so that no one would notice them. The Duchess had to literally pull the surprised maid by the hand. Rosalie turned her head in the direction of the noise, but fortunately for both girls, she didn't notice anything.